Hi everyone, my name is Mingyan, and in this roleplay simulation for my BUS30031 Sustainable Business Practice class, I acted as an investigator, focusing on policy and legal compliance within the BUS30031 Health Snacks investigative team. This reflection analyzes my experience during the CT Confectionary child labor simulation, particularly on how ethical decision making, stakeholder considerations, and also cultural awareness influence both my behavior and the final recommendation made by the team. The simulation focused on a potential child labor issue within CT Confectionary supply chain. The concern emerged after children were allegedly seen during a supplier's video call. So, as investigators representing Bilby Health Snacks, our responsibility was to assess whether the partnership should continue or not. After evaluating this situation, our team recommended continuing the partnership under strict conditions, including stronger monitoring and independent audits. My role as investigator focused mainly on policy and legal compliance. I was responsible for examining CT Confectionary's child labor policies, assessing whether they align with international labor standards, and also evaluating whether those policies were effectively enforced in practice. This role required balancing legal expectations with realistic operational challenges within global supply chains. So the main ethical dilemma in the simulation was whether policies alone are sufficient if enforcement remains weak. Although CT Confectionary claimed to prohibit child labor through formal supply policies, there were still visible gaps in monitoring and verification. This highlighted a broader issue in ethical supply chain management, where organizations may publicly promote ethical standards while struggling to enforce them consistently across suppliers. When evaluating the situation, I tried to balance both ethical responsibilities and operational realities. Rather than immediately assuming guilt, I focused on understanding whether CT confectionery systems were capable of preventing and also detecting child labor effectively. I analyzed several factors during the investigation, including supplier monitoring systems, policy enforcement, reputational risks, and also stakeholder impact. This helped me evaluate whether the issue reflected an isolated incident or a broader weakness within the supply chain. One important lesson I learned was that ethical supply chain management requires more than simply having policies in place. Effective enforcement and accountability mechanisms are equally important in ensuring that ethical standards are followed consistently across suppliers. The stakeholder theory strongly influenced my thinking during the roleplay. I realized that ethical decisions affect multiple groups simultaneously, including workers, suppliers, consumers, shareholders, and also business partners. This simulation reinforced that ethical decisions affect multiple stakeholders simultaneously, including workers, suppliers, consumers, shareholders, and business partners. I learned that businesses must balance profitability with social responsibility, especially when operating within global supply chains. Stakeholder theory suggests that organizations should consider the interests of all affected groups during decision-making processes. I also realized that companies which fail to manage stakeholder expectations may face reputational damage, loss of trust, and also long-term sustainability risk. Another ethical perspective relevant to the simulation was utilitarianism. Immediately terminating the partnership could potentially harm workers and families who depended on the supply chain economically. However, ignoring the issue entirely would also create serious ethical risk. So, as a result, the recommendation to continue the partnership under strict conditions represented a more balanced approach that attempted to minimize overall harm while encouraging improvement and also accountability. The simulation also highlighted the importance of corporate social responsibility. I learned that businesses are increasingly expected to maintain ethical practices not only within their own operations but throughout their supply chains as well. Transparency, accountability, and responsible sourcing are now critical expectations for multinational organizations operating globally. Cultural awareness also influenced my thinking during the simulation. In some developing regions, economic pressures and local realities may increase the risk of child labor practices. However, I also realized that cultural or economic differences should not be used to justify exploitation. This experience taught me the importance of balancing empathy and also cultural understanding with international ethical standards and human rights expectations. One aspect that significantly improved our roleplay was strong team coordination. Clear role delegation and structured questioning helped the discussion flow more naturally and professionally. I also learned that flexibility and active listening were more effective than relying on overly rigid scripts because they allowed more realistic interactions during the investigation. Personally, this experience taught me a lot about myself. I realized that I naturally focus strongly on rules, compliance, and also accountability. However, the role play also showed me that ethical decision making requires empathy, flexibility, and also consideration of broader consequences. It also helped me to become more confident in asking critical questions and analyzing ethical concerns in professional situations. In my future career, this experience will influence how I approach ethical issues within organizations. I now understand the importance of questioning not only whether policies exist, but whether they are genuinely enforced in practice or not. I also gain greater awareness of supply chain accountability, ethical leadership, and the importance of transparent communication when addressing sensitive issues. So, in conclusion, this roleplay strengthened my understanding of ethical decision making within global business environments. I learned that ethical leadership requires balancing stakeholder interests, operational realities, and corporate responsibilities simultaneously. Most importantly, I realized that policies alone are insufficient within proper enforcement, transparency, and accountability. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.